Hello everyone! It's time to start the 2024 F1 season content. Very happy about it. Glad that 2023 is over and done with. Excited to start a fresh year with a clean slate. And yeah, just feeling re-energized after that holiday break. So I thought I would start off with a similar video that I did in 2023, where I lay out my bias for various F1 drivers for all of my followers to see. It can be risky to do this, but I do think that it kind of sets everyone's expectations for who I will and will not be cheering for. And I like to see how this list changes year after year because my opinions of the drivers do change as well. Before I start, I do have one disclaimer. This is my opinion and it is based purely on the drivers' vibes. I don't know any of them personally, so I'm only commenting on how I feel on these drivers based on my perception of them. Everyone puts a different version of themselves out to the world than they are behind the scenes, and so I cannot say with certainty if I met any of these drivers whether or not my opinion would be the same. Let's get started. So similar to last year, I'm using this website called the F1 Biasorter, made by Futrell on Tumblr. I just find it really interesting that you can kind of compare each of them side by side to help you form a ranking, and I think this is the most unbiased way that you can do it, although they call this the bias sorter. So when I do this, I kind of have two rules. First is I imagine that if these two drivers were in the same team, who would I cheer for? Because that eliminates the bias that the team that they drive in has on the results. And then I also never choose I like both in our opinion. I'm always choosing one or the other just so that I get a definitive ranking. Otherwise, sometimes you get ties if you choose the middle two. Logan Sargent, Zhou Guanyu. So there will be cases where my opinion of their skills will influence things, and unfortunately for me, I just haven't seen enough from Logan for him to be a worthwhile F1 driver, and so I'm choosing Zhou Guanyu for now. Hopefully that will change this year, and if Logan can improve, perhaps my opinion of him will change as well. Nico Hülkenberg and Kevin. So this one's easy because they're already in Haas, and I just find myself cheering more for Nico. Sergio and Daniel. Everybody knows Daniel Ricciardo's my boy, so I'm just gonna quickly click through any with him. Oh, Lewis and George. I think this one is tricky because I loved George on Williams, but for some reason him on Mercedes, I've just never really gelled with him. I think it's just a clash of personalities. So for me, I would cheer for Lewis. Ooh, Esteban and Pierre, they're really going for all of the teammate pairings initially here. I think I've always been more impartial to Pierre. Joe and Valtteri. Oh, that's a tricky one. I like them both equally, but I don't really have that high of an opinion on either of them. But I think I always kind of cheer for the younger guys in most cases. Logan and Valtteri, I think I'm leaning Valtteri on that one. Lance and Alex. Lance is a fellow Canadian, so I've always had a little bit of a soft spot for him, although he does. I really wish sometimes that we would have a better representation for Canada, but he does his best. But yeah, I'm definitely impartial to Alex. Nico and Fernando. I wouldn't have called myself much of a Fernando fan before this past year, but he's completely changed my opinion. He's just such a ball of chaos, and I can't help but cheer for him. Now, Charles and Carlos. This one is also pretty clear. It's Charles, Daniel and Yuki, another teammate pairing, and once again, it's Daniel. Ah, interesting. Sergio and Yuki. Prior to this past year, I wasn't a huge Yuki Tsunoda fan. I think I just didn't understand the hype behind him, but he really impressed me this past year, and since he seems to now be likely sticking around for at least a little while, I think I have allowed myself to get more invested in him, if that makes sense. Like if a rookie's coming in and you don't really see them lasting very long in F1, I find it hard to really like invest in them when I know that they might be out soon. But I think Yuki has finally kind of proven that he might stick around for a while, and so I'm able to invest in him more, and he's just so funny. So I think between him and Sergio, I think I would cheer for Yuki. All right, here we go. Oscar versus Max. I think if they were in the same team, I would be cheering for the underdog Oscar to try and take some wins away from Max. So I would cheer for Oscar. Ooh, Lewis and Lando. This is always an interesting one. I think Lando is a driver who I find my opinion of changes probably the most of any driver, because sometimes he can be very funny, very likable, and very easy to root for. And then other times he just has a snide comment and I'm just like, oh, so, like it just really bothers me sometimes. Lewis is obviously a fantastic driver, 7-time world champion. If they were on the same team though, I think similarly to the Max and Oscar situation, I think I would be cheering for the younger upstart driver. Joe and Pierre. Now this is one where Joe, he's very likable, very neutral. Pierre, I also have my ups and downs with him. I think he leans a little bit too hard into the whole tripod situation. And it's a bit much sometimes, I will say. But I think he has a little bit more to him and a lot more upside, and so I find him easier to cheer for. Ooh, Joe and Esteban. Esteban is also a driver where I find my opinion of him changes quite a bit. He can be petty, but he also seems like such a nice guy, and so his on-track and off-track personas, I just get so confused by. But I do think that I like him a little bit more than Joe. Ooh, Fernando and Alex. That's a tricky one. Both are great personalities. Alex is super likable. Fernando is just a chaotic person. But I think if they were on a team together, I would lean a little bit more towards Alex. I think he has a little bit more of that underdog quality to him. Fernando and Stroll are already teammates, and I definitely am more impartial to Fernando. Nico and Stroll. Ooh. I'm gonna think of it like this. If Nico joined Aston Martin, I think I would cheer for Nico because he would be in a car that was capable of getting a podium, and I just want him to get a podium so bad. And so I actually think I would cheer for Nico over Lance in that scenario. Now Lance and Kevin, on the other hand, I think I would be more impartial to Lance. I think I just like him a little bit more as a driver. Oh my god. Oh god. Okay, in my imagination, if these two were on a team together, it would be at Ferrari. Charles is Ferrari's golden boy. Daniel would be coming in as the veteran driver to kind of be a second driver to Charles. Would that irritate me enough that my opinion with Charles would decrease? Or would I be just the biggest hardcore Ferrari fan ever and be cheering for both of them to do well and just be so sad when they're both completely traumatized by that team? With Daniel being out of the sport for half of the year last year, my fandom of Charles went so far up, but I think since Daniel's older, he has less chances of being an F1 world champion, which is never gonna happen, but let a girl dream. And so I think I would cheer a little bit more for Daniel, and it would hurt me so much. But that was easily the hardest one. Yuki and Charles, easily Charles. Ooh, Yuki and Carlos. Carlos is kind of in a similar vein to Lando for me, where he is sometimes just has a few snide comments that bother me. Or his like family on Twitter just being a little bit too out of pocket. Honestly, I think I'm picking Yuki. I think Yuki has gone quite a ways up my ranking this year. Ooh, now Sergio and Carlos. I think Sergio's like a great family man, obviously, representing Mexico, Carlos representing Spain. I think this one would honestly, if they were teammates together, would depend entirely on who was doing better. I think I would just cheer for the better driver of the two. And honestly, I think at this point we can probably say Carlos is probably the better driver of these two. So I think if they were on a team together, I would choose for him. Lando and Oscar. So this is the current McLaren situation. I think Lando still has the edge in terms of race performance. Lando annoys me when he goes on the radio asking for a team order so he can get past Oscar. And so for that reason, I think I'm gonna go Oscar. He's a little bit more of an underdog compared to Lando, and I'm always wanting to root for the underdog. Okay, Lando, Max. This is another situation where I would be cheering for the underdog, and compared to Max, Lando is the underdog. Oof. Ooh, this is a spicy meatball. This is a really, really tricky one for me because we all went through this during the 2021 season and I could not decide which of the two I was cheering for. And I think I just watched that season just being entertained by all the drama and just the extreme competitive races that we had from when I started watching in Monza until the end of the year. I think there were times where I liked Lewis more and there were times that I liked Max more. But if we're looking at this current point in time, if they were on the same team, I would want Lewis to get his 8th so that he could then retire and open up his spot for a new driver to come in. I think Lewis was probably pretty close to retiring around the 2021 season, and the fact that he didn't win has meant that he wants to stick around until he gets that record. And so I think we would be seeing a different crop of drivers in here if he won that year. And so I think I would cheer for Lewis in this situation. Now, George versus Max. This, if they were teammates, oh my god. It would be war between the two of them. George is just as much of a menace to society as Max is, at least on the road. And it would be so entertaining. I wouldn't be shocked if we got like a 2007 McLaren situation if these two were teammates and they just took each other out too often and another team snuck up behind them and took the championship. That would be my prediction if these two were teammates. And this might surprise you all, but I do actually think I like Max a little bit more than George, which is wild. But I love George off track. I think he is such a meme so much of the time, but I don't know. It's, yeah, like I said earlier, it's just a clash of personalities. Ooh, Alex and Pierre. Now this brings me back to the Red Bull driver swap back in 2019. If they were teammates together, I do think I appreciate Alex Albon's personality a little bit more. Like I said earlier, I think Pierre sometimes irks me. Ooh, Fernando and Pierre. I think this is very, very similar to a Fernando-Esteban pairing, and so I think I would probably cheer for Fernando. Pierre and Nico, I think I would cheer for Pierre. Unless Nico was going for a podium, then I would cheer for Nico, but 90% of the time that isn't happening, so I think I would be on Pierre's side. Ooh, Nico and Esteban. Were they ever teammates? I don't think they actually were, because Nico was with Daniel in 2019, but then Daniel was with Esteban in 2020, so I don't think they ever were teammates. They missed out on it by a year. I think I would lean towards Esteban. Nico and Joe. I think I would cheer for Joe. Oh, Nico and Valtteri. I think I would lean towards Valtteri. And then Nico and Logan. I think I would lean towards Nico. Lance and Logan. Right now it's Lance. Kevin and Logan. Sorry, Kevin. I think I would cheer for Logan there. Ooh, Daniel and Oscar. The two Aussies. And the one that took Daniel's place at McLaren. I think a year ago, if these two were against each other in the Biasorter, I would have had a lot more pettiness when it came to Oscar and how I ranked him in this thing, but I think I'm over that, but it's still clearly Daniel. Between Oscar and Charles, Ooh, Oscar and Yuki. Oscar and Yuki were on a team together. That is an interesting thought. Oscar has a lot more dry humor to him, and I think he bounces well off other drivers because he is a little bit quieter, and so him and Lando together is very entertaining. I think it would be similar with him and Yuki. I think for me, I see really good things in Oscar's future, and I think that's something that I want to get behind, so I think I would be partial to Oscar. Yuki and Lando, I think I would cheer for Lando in that pairing. Ooh, Yuki and Lewis. That would be a fun pairing. I feel like Yuki could bring out a side of Lewis that would be interesting to see. Yuki would be the underdog in the situation, but I don't know. Oh man, this one is just purely on vibes. I just feel like I think I would lean a little bit more in Lewis's direction. Yuki and Max, this is actually a potential future driver pairing. I think if Yuki can kind of quell some of his more impatient moments, I think this could be a possibility depending on how well things go between him and Daniel this year. Similarly, I think I would cheer for Yuki coming in against Max. Max and Carlos. Oh, this one's actually trickier than I would think. I think this is a return to 2015 Toro Rosso, I think. And apparently they did not get along at all, and their fathers really butted heads. That is the rumor that goes around. I feel like this would be just so similar to just Max versus Checo. And I think I would start to feel bad for Carlos at a certain point, and then I would cheer for him for that reason. So, yep, and then here we go again, Max versus Sergio. I feel bad for Sergio, so I cheer for him. Ooh, Daniel Alex. Interesting thought. It's still Daniel though. Alex Charles. Now, this is a potential Ferrari pairing because I think if Carlos decided to leave Ferrari or Ferrari decided not to re-sign him, I think Alex Albon would be one of the first drivers they would look at to replace him, because I think Alex's driving style is actually very similar to Charles, and I think the biggest issue I'm seeing right now with Ferrari's driver pairing is that I think Charles and Carlos have two different of driving styles, so it's tough to make a car that suits both of them, because we saw this past year when Carlos was good, Charles was struggling, and then once Charles started to improve, Carlos started to struggle, and so it's always one or the other that's succeeding. And so I think they need two drivers with the same style so that they can both do well. So I think this is potential as a future driver pairing. I do think I would still lean towards Charles though. Alex and Oscar, I think I just don't know enough about Oscar yet to be able to fully get on board with him, but Alex, I'm all the way there. Fernando Oscar, this could have been a pairing in a different universe at Alpine. Although I guess Esteban always had that contract. I think last year, if they had not given that contract to Esteban, last year would have gone very, very differently. I'm always one to cheer for the younger kind of rookie driver. So I think I would cheer for Oscar there. Ooh, Lando versus Fernando. I think Lando has a few Fernando qualities to him. He isn't quite as petty. I think Lando needs to lean more into his sometimes more villainous qualities. Whereas Fernando just leans fully into it. He's a great heel. If these two were teammates, I think I would cheer for Fernando. Lando versus Pierre. I think I'm a little bit more impartial to Lando at this point. Ooh, Pierre and Lewis. I think Pierre has a little bit of an underdog quality to him, and so I think I would cheer for him against Lewis. Lewis versus Esteban. I think I would cheer for Lewis. Esteban versus Yuki. I think I'm at the point where I'd cheer for Yuki. And Esteban Carlos. I think I would actually cheer for Carlos in that situation. Esteban Sergio, bringing it back to Force India 2018. And these two did not get along. I think looking back at that, especially that one Singapore race, Sergio really bugged me in that race. I think he was way too aggressive. And so I think I'm a little bit more impartial to Esteban there. Sergio, Joe. I think I'd cheer for Joe. Ooh, Sergio Valtteri. Now, interestingly, this was kind of a thing you kind of had to think about back in 2021. It's like, who do you cheer more for as the second drivers at Red Bull and Mercedes? And I think at that point I was more impartial to Sergio, but I've liked Valtteri a lot more as a driver since he's left Mercedes. And so I think if they were teammates, I think I would cheer more for Valtteri. Sergio and Nico. Interesting. I think I would cheer for Nico. Sergio and Lance. So I don't think they ever crossed paths at... Oh no, they were teammates, weren't they? In Racing Point. And I think I was way more on Sergio Perez's side in that season, just because he was absolutely killing it in that car and Lance could not compare. Max and Lance. Oof. Lance would get absolutely obliterated and we would all be like, why is this guy in F1? Would I lean towards Max in that situation, or would it be so underdog you would just pity the fool? I think I'm starting to get to the point where I'm like, why is Lance still in F1? So I think when that starts to happen, that's when I do actually lose my interest in them as a driver. George versus Lance. This is one where I think they're pretty equal, but I think the Canadian of Lance would cause me to cheer more for him. George versus Logan. If they were teammates, I think I would feel bad for Logan if he continued to crash the way he did in 2023. I just can't find myself to cheer for George. I'm really sorry, George. I don't know what it is. George versus Kevin, though, I think I would cheer for George. I feel like Kevin is like, no offense, he's kind of the NPC drivers. I don't know. I was so happy for him when he got his pole in Brazil, but I don't know. He's just nowhere most of the time. And so I just very little opinion of him. All right, so let's review my order here. So I've got Daniel in first, no surprise there. Charles in second, no surprise there either. Alex in third, no surprise there. I've said consistently in 2023 that they are my top 3 drivers. Now, Oscar being in fourth, that is interesting, because I think at the start of last season, he was way further down. And then I've got Fernando in fifth. He's also shot way up. Drive to Survive, that first season, really cast him in a bad light. And so I think he would have been P20 if I had rated the drivers as a fan that season. But I think him stepping away from F1 was probably one of the best things that could have happened in terms of people's enjoyment of him, because I know that there's a lot of people out there that really don't like Fernando, like especially a lot of Seb fans. I know that they really don't like him, and I'm sure a lot of Lewis fans also feel the same. But I think him coming back, he's just had a little bit of a different flavor to him, and it's I think a little bit easier to root for him as a person and driver. 6 is Lando, 7 is Pierre. Okay, Pierre back in 2021 probably would have been my 3rd favorite. Oh no, actually, he probably would have been my 2nd favorite driver. So he's kind of slowly dropped over the years. I think it's mainly just aspects of him that take a joke too far. He does tend to complain a lot on the radio, and I find drivers who do that a lot, it really bothers me. And so that tends to drop them down, which is why Lando has probably also dropped from when I first started being an F1 fan in 2021, because he also tends to complain on the radio. And I think him being against Daniel also would have impacted his placement on here, because I'm always going to lean towards Daniel. And so it's always any little thing that his teammate does is going to irritate me to a bigger degree. And 8 is Lewis. Okay, and 9 is Yuki. So Yuki's kind of gotten like middle of the pack. Carlos is 10th. Interesting. I think that's higher than I probably would have put him. Joe Guan Yu P12, which is interesting because I think I had Joe at like P4 last year, which was wild. I think I was still very caught up in the crash that he had at Silverstone, and I think that really bumped up his ranking for me, and just how much people kind of got behind him and him being just the rookie last season. But this year, I think he didn't really do much to change my opinion of him. And so I think he dropped as a result. And he's just 1 spot ahead of Valtteri. So they're like very, very close to me. I don't really have much of a difference of opinion between the two of them. Now, Nico is, I think, higher than he would have been at the start of last year. I can't remember where he was, but he was definitely close to the bottom. But I think I realized this past year how much I actually really want him to get a podium, and I think just that one fact just makes me cheer for him a little bit more. Sergio has really dropped. Just how much he struggled last year has dropped my opinion of him as a driver. I don't know, in past years it just seemed like he was a little bit closer to Max, and in 2023 just that gap just widened to a degree that I just can't reconcile anymore. And so it's tough to cheer for someone that you don't necessarily think deserves the seat that they have. And then Max is actually only one spot behind him. So I think Max was P19 last year, and so he's gone up a few spots. And I think this is partially because I think a few other drivers dropped a lot more for me, rather than Max doing anything to change. But I think I also watched a lot more Red Bull content this past year, with Daniel being in a lot of their marketing stuff, and so I think I got to see a bit more of Max's personality, and I quite like him as a person off track. I think he is very funny. I think it is incredible how he's turned out as a human, considering how his father treated him, because he could have ended up a very different person because of that. And I think that side of him more comes out as a driver. Max is one of those people where I like him a lot as a person, but as a driver, I just can't get behind him. Lance is P17. I think this is the effect of me not necessarily thinking he deserves the seat that he has. Logan, I think right now it's just I think we kind of pity him a little bit, but I'm hoping that he can turn it around in 2024. And then George, yeah, I feel like he was pretty low in my last year's grid as well, but considering where I probably would have put him in 2021 after his incredible qualifying performance at Spa, I was hardcore cheering for him back then. But I don't know, just purely on vibes, I just don't gel with George. And then Kevin, yeah, just something about him, I just can never get behind him. Oh, interesting. I had said that Pierre had dropped from 2021, but he'd actually dropped from just this past year. I had him P2. Something caused that, can't remember what. I think something gave me the ick and it just dropped him. Alex is still P3 though, so that hasn't changed. And like I said, Joe was P4. Oh, Lewis was P5. So I had Lewis higher up than I used to. Interesting. Sometimes it's just how I feel on that particular day. Some of these are pretty interchangeable if I'm being honest. Fernando's increased from where he was. Lando has stayed the same. Esteban has dropped from last year. Valtteri's also dropped. Oscar's gone way up. Sergio's dropped. Carlos actually has improved, which is surprising. I would have thought he would have decreased, because maybe it's just more other drivers decreased compared to him. So I don't know. Interesting. And Yuki's gone way up. Lance has dropped. De Vries is gone. Kevin really dropped. Oh wow. I think that was after his pole in Brazil, and so that gave him a little bit of a boost in my ranking. Nico's gone a bit up. George has dropped a little bit. Max has gone up, like I said, and Logan has actually gone up as well. So yeah, very, very interesting. So let me know what your ranking of the 2024 F1 drivers is. I will put a link to the 2024 bias sorter in the video description, so check that out if you want to do it for yourself and see how your ranking compares to mine. Yeah, and so I'm hoping to put out a video a week leading up to the 2024 F1 season. I think the next few weeks will be more so kind of general videos, and then going into February, that's when I'll do more so my prediction video as well as my driver ranking video. Enjoy your week, and we'll see you again soon for the next one.